Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about yourself just shattered? Where one action, one decision, one single second revealed a truth so powerful it changed your entire life? What I'm about to share with you is true. It happened 3 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And I need you to stay with me, because this isn't just another story. This is about a billionaire who had everything, a young woman who had nothing, and one slap that echoed around the world. Picture this, a luxury restaurant. Crystal chandeliers. The wealthy elite dining on food that costs more than most people make in a week. And in the center of it all, a powerful man raises his hand and strikes a waitress across the face because she spilled water on his wife's dress. The sound cracked through that restaurant like thunder. Everyone froze. Phones came out. Cameras started recording. And what happened next? What happened next would expose a family secret buried for 30 years. A secret about love, betrayal, and a man who was erased from history simply because of who he chose to marry. By the end of this story, that billionaire would be on his knees, weeping. That waitress would become one of the most powerful women in the city. And a name that was forbidden to be spoken would be written across buildings, foundations, and the hearts of thousands of people. But it all started with anger, with pride, with a man who thought his money made him untouchable, and a young woman carrying an ID card that would bring an empire to its knees. So let me take you back to that Tuesday evening. Let me show you how one moment of violence became a movement of healing, how hatred transformed into hope, and how a family torn apart by shame finally found redemption. This is the story of Maya and David, of a grandfather's love that never died, and of the truth that refused to stay buried. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, sometimes life changes in a single moment. 1 second, everything is normal. The next second, nothing will ever be the same again. This is a story about one of those moments. A story about pride, pain, and the truth that refused to stay buried. It happened on a Tuesday evening at the Golden Palace, the fanciest restaurant in downtown Atlanta. You know the type of place I'm talking about. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection. Tables covered in white cloth so crisp they looked like fresh snow. The kind of place where a single meal costs more than most people make in a week. The restaurant was packed that night. Businessmen in expensive suits. Women dripping in diamonds. Everyone talking in hushed voices, trying to look important. Soft piano music played in the background. Waiters moved silently between tables like ghosts, careful not to disturb the atmosphere of wealth and power. At the center of it all stood a young woman named Maya. She was 24 years old, petite, with dark skin that glowed under the soft lights. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun. She wore the standard server uniform, black pants, white shirt, black apron tied at the waist. In her hands, she carried a silver tray with glasses of water. Maya had been working at the Golden Palace for 3 months. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills. Well, barely. She also worked weekend shifts at a coffee shop just to make rent on her tiny apartment across town. At night, after both jobs, she studied online courses, trying to finish the college degree she'd started years ago, but couldn't afford to complete. But Maya had something money couldn't buy. She had dignity. She had strength. And she had a secret that would soon turn one man's world upside down. That evening, Table 12 had been reserved for someone special. The manager had been nervous all day, straightening his tie, checking and rechecking the table setup. "Mr. David Sterling is coming tonight," he'd told the staff that morning. The David Sterling. The billionaire. He owns Sterling Industries. Half the buildings in this city have his name on them. So please, everyone, be perfect. No mistakes. Maya had nodded quietly. She'd heard the name before. Who hadn't? David Sterling was one of the richest men in Georgia. His face was on magazine covers. His company built everything from hotels to shopping malls to apartment complexes. People said he was brilliant, ruthless, a man who turned everything he touched into gold. At exactly 7 o'clock, David Sterling walked through the door. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Maya's car. His eyes were cold blue, the kind of eyes that look through people, not at them. Beside him walked his wife, Victoria, tall, blonde, beautiful in the way that comes from expensive salons and personal trainers. Diamonds sparkled at her throat. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as they walked to table 12. The manager practically bowed as he pulled out Victoria's chair. David didn't even look at him. He was already on his phone, closing some deal, making more money while walking to his seat. Maya was assigned to their table. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and approached with the water tray balanced perfectly on her palm. "Good evening," she said softly. "Welcome to the Golden Palace. May I offer you some water while you look at the menu?" David didn't respond. He was still on his phone. Victoria waved her hand dismissively, as if shooing away a fly. Maya poured the water carefully, precisely. She'd done this 1,000 times. But as she stepped back, David suddenly turned, gesturing with his hand as he talked on the phone. His elbow hit the tray. Time seemed to slow down. The glass tipped. Water splashed across the white tablecloth and onto Victoria's dress, an expensive silk dress that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. Victoria shrieked, "Oh my God! Look what you've done!" Maya's heart dropped. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. Let me. How dare you?" David's voice cut through the restaurant like a knife. He shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "How dare you walk right into me? Do you have any idea how much that dress costs?" "Sir, I apologize. It was an accident. Let me get some towels." "An accident?" David's voice got louder. People at other tables turned to look. "You blocked my wife. You weren't paying attention. You're incompetent." Maya felt her face burn with shame, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, I truly apologize. Please let me help clean." And then it happened. The moment that would change everything. David Sterling, billionaire, raised his hand and slapped Maya across the face. The sound cracked through the restaurant like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Forks clattered to plates. Someone gasped. The piano player's hands froze on the keys. Maya stood there, her cheek burning, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, looking at this powerful man who had just hit her in front of a room full of people. And in that moment, something inside her clicked. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby girl," he used to say, "never let anyone make you feel small. You carry a name that means something. Don't you ever forget that." The restaurant manager rushed over, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. She'll be fired immediately. Please let me." But Maya wasn't looking at the manager. She was looking at David Sterling. And slowly, with trembling hands, she reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. It was old, cracked at the edges, held together with love and memories. She opened it carefully and pulled out a faded ID card. She placed it on the table between the water glasses and the bread basket. "Before you fire me," Maya said, her voice quiet but steady, "maybe you should look at this." David frowned, confused. He picked up the card. His wife leaned over to see. And as David's eyes focused on the name printed on that old ID card, all the color drained from his face. His hand started to shake. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Because there, on that simple ID card, was a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in over 30 years. A name his family had buried. A name they'd tried to forget. Maya Johnson Sterling. Sterling. His family name. On the ID of the black woman he'd just slapped in front of dozens of witnesses. The restaurant fell into a silence so deep you could hear hearts beating. And somewhere, in the weight of that silence, the truth began to crack through the lies that had held it down for 3 decades. Let me tell you something about silence. Real silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of shock. It's the moment when everyone in a room realizes they've just witnessed something that can't be undone. That's the kind of silence that filled the Golden Palace that night. David Sterling stood frozen, staring at the ID card in his hand. His wife Victoria grabbed his arm. David, what's wrong? What is that?" Her voice had an edge of panic, like she could feel the ground shifting beneath her designer heels. The restaurant manager hovered nearby, confused and terrified. "Mr. Sterling? Sir? Should I call security?" "No." David's voice came out as barely a whisper. His eyes were locked on that card, on the name. Maya Johnson Sterling. "No, don't call anyone." Victoria snatched the card from his hand. She looked at it, then at Maya, then back at the card. "Sterling? This is ridiculous. This is some kind of scam. She probably printed this herself thinking she could get money from us. David, we need to." "It's not a scam," Maya said quietly. Her voice was steady now, stronger. The fear had burned away, leaving only truth. That card belonged to my grandfather, Thomas Sterling. Your uncle, Mr. Sterling. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a feather land on cotton. The entire restaurant had become an audience to something they didn't understand, but couldn't look away from. Phones came out. People started recording. In the age of social media, nothing stays private for long. David slowly sank back into his chair. His face had gone pale. Thomas, he whispered. Uncle Thomas. You remember him then, Maya said. It wasn't a question. Aye. David's voice cracked. He looked up at her, and for the first time, really looked at her. Studied her face. And in her eyes, in the shape of her jaw, in the way she stood with quiet dignity despite everything, he saw something familiar. He was my father's younger brother. He left the family a long time ago. He didn't leave, Maya said, and now there was steel in her voice. He was pushed out, disowned, erased. All because he fell in love with my grandmother, a black woman named Sarah. Your family told him to choose. The family business and the family name, or the woman he loved. He chose love, and your family made sure he paid for it. Victoria stood up abruptly. This is insane. David, we don't have to listen to this. She's clearly trying to manipulate you to get money. Please sit down, Victoria. David's voice was quiet but firm. She looked at him, shocked, but slowly sat back down. David turned back to Maya. How do you know all this? Maya reached into her apron again. This time she pulled out a small bundle of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. She placed them on the table next to the ID card. Because he told me. Before he died 2 months ago, he told me everything. And he gave me these. Letters he wrote to you, Mr. Sterling. Letters he sent to your family home over the years. He sent one every year on your birthday. Did you ever receive them? David picked up the bundle with shaking hands. He looked at the addresses. Sure enough, they were addressed to him, to the Sterling family estate in Buckhead. The postmarks went back years. 10 years. 15. 20. None of the envelopes had been opened. His father must have intercepted them, hidden them, thrown them away. David's throat tightened. I never saw these. Not one. I know, Maya said softly. He knew too. But he kept writing anyway. Because he never stopped caring about you. He used to tell me stories about you when you were a little boy. How he'd take you fishing. How he taught you to throw a baseball. How you'd sneak into his workshop and he'd let you help him build things. David's eyes filled with tears. He remembered. God, he remembered. Uncle Thomas with his warm laugh and strong hands. Uncle Thomas who never talked down to him, who treated him like he mattered. And then one day, Uncle Thomas was just gone. His father had sat him down and said, Your uncle made a choice. He chose to leave us. We don't speak his name anymore. That's what happens when you betray your family. David had been 9 years old. He'd cried himself to sleep that night. And eventually, as children do, he'd learned to stop asking questions. Uncle Thomas became like a dream, something that maybe never really happened. But he did happen. And now his granddaughter stood in front of David, bearing his name, carrying his legacy. What happened to him? David asked, his voice breaking. After he left, what happened? Maya took a breath. This was the hard part. He worked construction, factory jobs, whatever he could find. He and my grandmother raised my mother in a small house in East Atlanta. It wasn't much, but it was filled with love. My grandmother passed away 10 years ago. Cancer. After that, my grandfather lived alone. He never remarried. Never stopped loving her. She paused. And he never stopped loving your family either. Even after everything, he kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about Sterling Industries. About your successes. He was proud of you. Proud. David's voice was hollow. How could he be proud? I never even looked for him. I just believed what my father told me. That he'd abandoned us. He didn't blame you, Maya said gently. You were a child. But Mr. Sterling, my grandfather died alone in a rented room downtown. The landlord found him 3 days later. The only thing on his bedside table was a photograph of you from some business magazine. He circled your face and wrote in the margin, my nephew. Still has my sister's kind eyes. Hope he remembers what matters. David broke. Right there in the middle of that fancy restaurant, this powerful billionaire put his face in his hands and wept. His shoulders shook. Tears ran between his fingers. Victoria reached for him awkwardly, but she didn't seem to know what to do. This wasn't the man she'd married, the cold, controlled businessman. This was someone else. Someone raw and human and broken. The other diners watched in stunned silence. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others kept filming, knowing this moment would be everywhere by morning. The manager stood frozen, completely out of his depth. Nobody knew what to do. How do you respond when a man's entire world cracks open? Finally, David looked up. His eyes were red. His face was wet with tears. He looked at Maya, really looked at her, and said, "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. For everything. For my family. For what they did to him. For what I just did to you. I have no excuse. None." Maya felt her own tears finally fall. "He forgave you a long time ago, Mr. Sterling. He told me. If you ever meet my nephew, tell him I never stopped being proud of him. Tell him family isn't just blood. It's love. And love always leaves the door open." In that moment, something shifted. The anger, the shame, the decades of buried pain, it all began to transform into something else. Something that looked like the beginning of healing. But the night wasn't over yet, because Maya had one more thing to show him. One more truth that would shake the Sterling family to its core. Friends, let me tell you something about the truth. You can bury it. You can hide it in the back of a closet or the bottom of a drawer. You can pretend it doesn't exist. But truth is like a seed planted in the ground. Even in the darkness, even under all that weight, it's growing. And one day, when the time is right, it breaks through to the light. That's what was happening at table 12 of the Golden Palace. Truth was breaking through, and there was no stopping it now. David Sterling wiped his face with his napkin. He looked exhausted, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Around them, the restaurant was still frozen. Even the waiters had stopped pretending to work. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Victoria leaned close to her husband and whispered urgently, "David, we need to leave. Now, before this gets any worse. The press is going to destroy us. Do you understand? This girl walks into our lives with some story and an old ID card, and you're falling apart. We need to call our lawyers. We need. Victoria, please." David's voice was tired but firm. "Not now." She sat back, her jaw tight with frustration and something else. Fear, maybe. Because she could see it too. Everything they'd built, the image, the reputation, the social standing, it was all crumbling. Maya stood there, waiting. Patient. Like she had all the time in the world. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Sterling, there's something else you need to know. My grandfather didn't just walk away from your family empty-handed. He took something with him. Well, not took exactly. More like earned." David looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Maya pulled out one more envelope from her apron. This one was newer, official-looking. It had a law firm's name embossed on the corner. After my grandfather was forced out of the family, he still believed in what Sterling Industries was building. He believed in the vision. So even though he was working construction jobs, cleaning floors, doing whatever he could to survive, he saved every penny he could. And he invested. Invested? Victoria laughed sharply. In what? With what money? Maya looked at her calmly. In your company, Mrs. Sterling. My grandfather bought stock in Sterling Industries. Not under his real name. He knew that would never be allowed. He used my grandmother's maiden name, Sarah Haynes. Over 30 years, he bought shares whenever he could afford them. Small amounts at first. 10 shares here. 20 shares there. But it added up. David's eyes widened. That's impossible. I would have known. The board would have. The board knew there was a shareholder named S. Haynes, Maya interrupted gently. They just never knew who S. Haynes really was. My grandmother signed the papers, but the money came from my grandfather. It was all legal. All documented. I have the certificates. She slid the envelope across the table. He left everything to me in his will, including his shares in Sterling Industries. 7.5% of the company. The silence that followed was deafening. 7.5%. In a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That made Maya one of the largest shareholders. That gave her a voice. Power. A seat at the table her grandfather had been kicked away from. Victoria grabbed the envelope and tore it open. Her hands shook as she read the documents inside. This can't be real. David, tell me this isn't real. But David was reading over her shoulder, and his face told the whole story. It was real. All of it. Thomas Sterling had spent 3 decades quietly investing in the family business that had rejected him. Not for revenge. Not to take it over. But because he still believed in what it could be. What it should be. Why? David asked, looking up at Maya. Why would he do this? After everything, why would he help us? Maya smiled sadly. Because that's who he was. He used to tell me, baby girl, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. He let go of the anger, but he never let go of hope. He hoped that one day things would change, that the family would remember what really mattered. And what's that? David asked. People, Maya said simply. He used to say that a business that forgets its people isn't a legacy. It's just a monument to greed. He wanted Sterling Industries to be more than that. To mean more than that. David stood up slowly. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Maya. She was small compared to him, but she didn't back away. Didn't flinch. She just looked up at him with those steady eyes that reminded him so much of the uncle he'd lost. I slapped you, David said, his voice thick with shame. In front of all these people, I hit you because I was angry about some water on a dress. What kind of man does that make me? A man who made a mistake, Maya said quietly. A man who has a choice now. You can let pride win, or you can let love win. That's what my grandfather would say. David's face crumpled again. He was a better man than I'll ever be. Maybe, Maya said. But he believed you could be better than you are now. That's why he never gave up on you. And that's why I'm here. Not to take anything from you, Mr. Sterling, but to give something back. The truth. The family you lost. The chance to do better. Around them, the restaurant slowly came back to life. Whispers rippled through the room. Phones buzzed as videos uploaded to social media. The manager finally found his voice. Mr. Sterling, what should I? David turned to him. Clear the restaurant. Everyone out. We're closing for the night. Sir, you heard me. Close it. Give everyone a full refund and a voucher for another meal. Just get them out. Please. The manager nodded and started ushering confused, disappointed diners toward the exit. They left reluctantly, still craning their necks to see what would happen. Within minutes, the Golden Palace was empty except for David, Victoria, Maya, and a handful of staff. David turned back to Maya. What do you want? Tell me what you want, and I'll do it. Money. A settlement? Name it. Maya shook her head. I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. I want you to honor his memory. My grandfather spent his whole life building things, buildings, lives, hope. He never got credit for any of it. But you can change that. You have the power to make sure his name means something again. How? David asked desperately. Tell me how. And Maya did. Right there in that empty restaurant, she laid out her grandfather's vision. A foundation for workers and their families. Scholarships for kids from communities like hers. Fair wages and real respect for the people who built the buildings that made men like David rich. Not charity. Justice. Recognition. Dignity. As she spoke, David listened. Really listened. Maybe for the first time in his adult life, he heard someone talk about using money for something other than making more money. And something inside him, something he thought had died years ago, began to wake up. By the time Maya finished, tears were streaming down David's face again. Yes, he whispered. Yes. All of it. We'll do all of it. Victoria stood up abruptly. David, you can't promise her that. You can't just. I can, David said, turning to his wife. And I will. This is what's right, Victoria. For the first time in my life, I'm going to do what's right instead of what's profitable. She stared at him like he was a stranger. And maybe he was. Maybe the man she'd married, the cold, ruthless businessman, was finally becoming someone else. Someone better. She didn't say anything more. She just picked up her purse and walked out of the restaurant, her heels clicking on the marble floor until the sound faded away. David watched her go, then turned back to Maya. I'm sorry about that too. About her. About everything. Maya nodded. Change is hard, Mr. Sterling. Not everyone can handle it. Will you help me? David asked. Will you work with me to build what your grandfather dreamed of? I can't do it alone. I don't even know where to start. Maya looked at this powerful man, now humbled and broken open. She thought about her grandfather, about all those years of hoping and believing. And she smiled. Yes, she said. I'll help you. For him. They shook hands then, right there in that empty restaurant. A billionaire and a waitress. Or maybe just two people carrying the same name, finally coming together to honor the man who'd loved them both. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. Because it's one thing to make promises in an empty restaurant at night when emotions are running high. It's another thing entirely to follow through when the sun comes up and the real world comes knocking. and the real world came knocking hard. By the next morning, the video had gone viral. The slap, the ID card, David Sterling crying in public. It was everywhere, on news sites, trending on social media, playing on repeat on every entertainment show. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire slaps waitress, then learns she's family. Sterling Industries heir discovers hidden relative after public assault. The slap heard round Atlanta. David's phone rang constantly. His publicist, his lawyers, board members. Everyone wanted to know what he was going to do, how he was going to handle this. But David did something nobody expected. He called an emergency board meeting, and he insisted that Maya be there. The Sterling Industries headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta. The boardroom was on the 35th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. On any other day, it was impressive, a room designed to intimidate, to show power. But that morning, it felt different. Smaller somehow, despite its size. The board members arrived in expensive suits and designer dresses, their faces carefully neutral. They took their seats around the massive conference table. 12 people who collectively controlled decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They'd built empires, destroyed competitors, weathered scandals before. But as they waited, you could feel the tension in the air. The door opened. David walked in first, his face drawn but determined. And right behind him walked Maya. She wore a simple gray dress, borrowed from a friend. Nothing fancy. But she walked with her head high, her shoulders back. She looked every one of them in the eye as she took her seat at the table. Charles Morrison, the CFO, cleared his throat. David, with all due respect, what is this? The board meeting is for board members and senior executives. Not guests. She's not a guest, David said quietly. She's a shareholder. As of my Uncle Thomas's death, Maya Johnson Sterling owns 7.5% of this company. That makes her one of our largest private shareholders. She has every right to be here. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Impossible. There must be a mistake. We need to verify this. Legal needs to look into it. The word fraud was thrown around more than once. David raised his hand. It's been verified. I had our lawyers work through the night. Every share was legally purchased. Every document is in order. Thomas Sterling, my uncle, invested in this company for over 30 years under the name S. Haynes. It's all legitimate. Margaret Chun, the head of legal, adjusted her glasses. Even if that's true, David, this is a PR nightmare. You assaulted this woman in public. Now you're saying she's family and giving her access to the board? It looks like a payoff. It looks like we're trying to cover something up. No, David said firmly. What we're covering up is 3 decades of family secrets. 3 decades of pretending my uncle didn't exist because my father was ashamed of who he loved. That ends today. Thomas Bradford, the oldest board member, leaned forward. He'd known David's father. He'd been there when Thomas Sterling was pushed out. David, he said carefully, your father had his reasons. We live in a different world now, yes, but back then mixing races, especially in business families, it was complicated. Complicated. Maya spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet but clear. My grandmother was complicated. My grandfather's love was complicated. Their life together, raising my mother, building something from nothing, that was all complicated. But you know what wasn't complicated? The fact that Thomas Sterling helped design half the systems this company still uses. The fact that he could have sued you, exposed you, destroyed you. But he didn't. He invested in you instead. He believed in you. And he got nothing in return but silence. The room went quiet. Margaret Chun looked down at her papers. Charles Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They'd all known, in some vague way, that Thomas Sterling existed. But he'd been a ghost story, something from the past that nobody talked about. David stood up. I called this meeting for 2 reasons. First, to officially recognize Maya's ownership stake and to offer her a position on this board. More gasps. More protests. He raised his voice. And second, to propose something new. The Thomas Sterling Foundation. He clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. As he spoke, images flashed up, construction workers, families, children, communities. My uncle spent his life building things. Not just buildings, but hope. He worked construction jobs that paid minimum wage. He knew what it was like to break your back for people who don't even know your name. So here's what we're going to do. Sterling Industries is going to commit $50 million to start. We're creating scholarships for the children of construction workers. We're establishing fair wage standards across all our projects. We're building community centers in the neighborhoods where our workers live. And Maya is going to lead it. The room exploded again. 50 million? David, this is insane. The shareholders will revolt. You can't just give away money because you feel guilty. I'm not giving it away, David said calmly. I'm investing it. In people. In communities. In doing what's right. And if the shareholders don't like it, they can vote me out. But this is happening. With or without your approval. Maya stood up beside him. I know what you're all thinking, she said. That I'm just some waitress who got lucky. That I'm here for money or revenge or attention. But I'm here because my grandfather believed this company could be something more than a money machine. He believed it could change lives. Give people chances they wouldn't have otherwise. He poured his heart and his money into that belief. And I'm going to honor that. Whether you help me or not. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Thomas Bradford, the old board member, slowly started clapping. Just a slow, steady clap. One by one, others joined in. Not everyone. Some sat with their arms crossed, faces skeptical. But enough. Enough to matter. After the meeting, David and Maya stood by the windows, looking out over Atlanta. You know, David said, my wife left me this morning, packed her things, and moved to our place in Miami. Said I'd lost my mind. I'm sorry, Maya said. Don't be. David smiled sadly. Maybe I needed to lose my mind to find my heart. Your grandfather knew that. That's why he kept hoping for me. He saw the best in people, Maya agreed. Sometimes even when they couldn't see it themselves. David turned to her. I can't give you back the years he lost. I can't undo the pain my family caused. But I can try to build something that honors him. Something that makes the Sterling name mean more than money. Maya smiled. Then let's build it. Together. And that's what they did. Starting that very day, everything began to change. You know, friends, sometimes the most powerful changes don't happen overnight. They happen slowly, like dawn breaking. One moment of light, then another, until suddenly the whole sky is bright and you realize the darkness is gone. That's what happened in Atlanta over the next 6 months. Slowly at first, then faster, then unstoppable. The Thomas Sterling Foundation opened its doors on a warm spring morning. The building itself was something special. Not some fancy skyscraper, but a renovated warehouse in the old Fourth Ward neighborhood. The same area where Thomas Sterling had lived with his wife Sarah all those years ago. The brick walls were cleaned and preserved, the old industrial windows restored. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, with photographs lining the walls. Pictures of workers building Atlanta. Pictures of families. And right there in the center, a large portrait of Thomas Sterling, his arm around his wife, both of them smiling like they held the whole world in their hearts. The opening ceremony drew a crowd. Local families. Construction workers in their company shirts. Kids from the neighborhood. Media too, of course, cameras everywhere, reporters asking questions. But also people who just wanted to see what happened next in this story that had captured the city's heart. David Sterling stood at the podium, looking different than he had 6 months ago. Older, maybe with more gray in his hair. But also lighter somehow, like he'd put down a weight he'd been carrying his whole life. Beside him stood Maya, wearing a simple blue dress, her natural hair out in a beautiful afro. She looked confident, grounded, ready. 6 months ago, David began, his voice carrying across the crowd, I made the worst mistake of my life. I let anger and pride control me. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Someone who, it turned out, was family I didn't even know I had. That night, I thought my life was falling apart. But really it was falling together. For the first time, I was seeing clearly. He paused, looking at Maya. My uncle, Thomas Sterling, spent 30 years investing in a company that had rejected him. Not because he wanted revenge. Not because he was trying to prove something. But because he believed in what we could be if we just remembered why we started. If we remembered that buildings are made of steel and concrete, but legacies are made of people. The crowd applauded. David stepped back, and Maya took the microphone. My grandfather used to tell me stories, she said, her voice strong and clear. Stories about laying the foundation for skyscrapers. He said the foundation is the most important part because it's what holds everything else up. But nobody ever sees it. It's buried underground. He said that's like the workers, the foundation of everything, but invisible. This foundation is about making them visible again. Over the next hour, they announced the programs. Full college scholarships for 50 students each year, children of construction workers and service workers. free job training programs, a daycare center so parents could work without worrying about their kids, a health clinic offering free checkups and basic care, a community kitchen serving meals to anyone who needed them, and most importantly, a new policy across all Sterling Industries projects: fair wages, safe conditions, and respect. But here's the thing that really mattered, friends. It wasn't just the programs. It was the shift. Other companies started paying attention. If Sterling Industries could do it, why couldn't they? Within months, 3 other major construction companies in Atlanta announced similar initiatives. A movement was building. Not everyone was happy, of course. Some board members resigned from Sterling Industries, saying David had gone soft, that he was destroying shareholder value. Some investors pulled out. The company's stock dipped for a while. David's ex-wife Victoria gave interviews to magazines, painting him as having a midlife crisis, claiming he'd been manipulated. But you know what? For every critic, there were 10 supporters. Workers who'd spent decades feeling invisible suddenly felt seen. Families who'd struggled suddenly had hope. Kids who thought college was impossible suddenly had a path forward. And slowly, the company's reputation changed. Sterling Industries became known not just as a place that built buildings, but as a place that built lives. One afternoon, about 8 months after that night at the Golden Palace, Maya was working late at the foundation office. She was reviewing scholarship applications when she heard a knock on her door. She looked up to see an elderly black woman standing there, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. "Can I help you?" Maya asked, standing up. The woman smiled. "You don't know me, but I knew your grandfather. I'm Dorothy. I worked with Thomas at the Wilson Construction Company back in the 80s. We were on the same crew." Maya's eyes widened. "Please come in. Sit down. Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "Just a minute of your time, baby," Dorothy said, settling into a chair. "I saw all the news about what happened. About you and that Sterling man. About this foundation. And I had to come tell you something." "What's that?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Your grandfather saved my life once. Literally. We were working on a high-rise, and some scaffolding gave way. I started to fall, and Thomas grabbed me. Pulled me back. Risked his own life to save mine." She wiped her eyes. "But that's not even the important part. The important part is what happened after. I was so shaken up, I wanted to quit. I had 3 kids at home and no husband. That job was all I had, but I was terrified. You know what Thomas did?" Maya shook her head, tears forming in her own eyes. "He came to my apartment every morning for 2 weeks. Picked me up. Drove me to work. Talked to me the whole way about courage and fear, and how the only way through fear is straight ahead. He made me believe I could do it. Because of him, I kept that job for 20 more years. Put all 3 of my kids through college. Now I got grandkids of my own." Dorothy reached across the desk and took Maya's hand. "What you're doing here, honoring his name, helping people like he helped me, baby, he's smiling down on you right now. I know he is." Maya couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "Thank you for telling me that. You have no idea how much I needed to hear it." After Dorothy left, Maya sat in her office as the sun set, painting the walls orange and gold. She thought about her grandfather. About all the lives he'd touched that she'd never known about. About all the good he'd done in silence, never asking for credit or recognition. And she understood something important. This wasn't about revenge or even justice, really. It was about love. Love that refused to die, even when buried under decades of shame and silence. The door opened again. This time it was David. He looked tired but peaceful. "Hey," he said. "I thought I'd find you here. You know you're allowed to go home sometimes, right?" Maya laughed. "Says the man who sleeps in his office half the time." "Fair point." He sat down across from her. "I just came from a board meeting. They approved funding for Phase 2. We're expanding the foundation to 3 more cities: Memphis, Birmingham, and Charlotte." "David, that's amazing." "It's what Thomas would have wanted," David said quietly. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that night. The slap. The worst moment of my life, and somehow it led to this. To something good. My grandfather used to say that God has a way of turning our worst moments into our biggest blessings," Maya said. "If we let him." David nodded. "I'm learning that. Slowly. Victoria called me yesterday, by the way." "Oh, yeah. She wanted to let me know she's engaged. To some hedge fund guy in Miami. She sounded happy, actually. Happier than she ever was with me." He smiled sadly. "Turns out we wanted different things. She wanted the image of success. I wanted Well, I'm still figuring out what I want. But I think it's something like this. Something that matters. You're doing good work, David, Maya said softly. Real good. The kind that changes things. We're doing good work, he corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you. You brought your grandfather's heart to this company. That's the piece that was missing all along. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights blink on one by one as night fell. Can I ask you something? David said finally. Of course. Do you forgive me? For that night? For the slap? For everything. Maya looked at him for a long moment. My grandfather taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to build something new instead of staying stuck in the hurt. So yes, David, I forgive you. But more importantly, I think you're forgiving yourself. And that's the hardest part. David's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. For everything. For being patient with me. For seeing something in me worth saving. That's what family does, Maya said simply. And in that moment, in that office overlooking Atlanta, two people who'd started as strangers, connected by nothing but a name and a tragedy, became something more. They became family. Real family. The kind that's built not on blood alone, but on choice, on forgiveness, on working together towards something bigger than themselves. 3 years later, the Thomas Sterling Foundation had expanded to 12 cities across the South. Over 500 students had received full college scholarships. Thousands of workers had gone through job training programs. Dozens of community centers were serving families in neighborhoods that had been forgotten. And Sterling Industries, despite all the predictions of doom, was more profitable than ever. Turned out that treating people with dignity was good for business too. Maya stood on stage at the Foundation's annual gala, a major fundraising event held at, of all places, the Golden Palace restaurant. The very spot where everything had changed. The room was packed with donors, community leaders, and families who'd been helped by the foundation. 3 years ago, Maya said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong, I was working as a waitress in this very room. I was struggling to make rent, working 2 jobs, trying to finish school. I felt invisible. Like I didn't matter. Like people like me were just background noise in other people's important lives. The room was silent, listening. And then something happened that changed everything. Something painful. Something that shouldn't have happened. But out of that pain, something beautiful grew. Because one man made a choice. He chose to listen instead of defend. To admit fault instead of make excuses. To change instead of stay comfortable. David Sterling chose to honor a legacy instead of protect an image. She gestured to David, who sat at a front table looking emotional. But more than that, this room, this city, made a choice too. You chose to believe that change was possible. That people could grow. That mistakes could become lessons. And that a waitress carrying her grandfather's dream could help build something that matters. The room burst into applause. Maya smiled through her tears. My grandfather used to say, baby girl, we're all just walking each other home. Might as well make the journey beautiful. So thank you, all of you, for making this journey beautiful. For honoring a man who never got to see this moment, but who believed in it his whole life. Thank you for choosing love over judgment. Hope over cynicism. Action over apathy. As the applause continued, Maya looked up at the ceiling, imagining her grandfather watching from somewhere beyond. And she just knew that he was proud. Not because of the money or the buildings or the headlines, but because people were being seen, being valued, being lifted up instead of pushed down. That night, after the gala ended and the last guests left, Maya and David stood together in the empty restaurant. The same spot where he'd slapped her 3 years ago. The same spot where everything fell apart and came together all at once. You know what's funny? David said. I spent my whole life building things, buildings, businesses, wealth. But the only thing I ever built that mattered started right here, with the worst thing I ever did. It's not funny, Maya said gently. It's grace. That's what my grandfather would call it. Grace that takes our broken pieces and makes something whole. David nodded, looking around the empty restaurant. I used to think legacy was about leaving your name on buildings, making sure people remembered you were here. And now? Maya asked. Now I think legacy is about leaving people better than you found them, making sure they know they matter, that they're seen. He turned to her. Your grandfather understood that. He left the greatest legacy of all. He left you. And you're changing the world. We're changing the world, Maya corrected, echoing what he'd told her years ago. Together. The way families should. They walked out of the Golden Palace together, out into the warm Atlanta night. Behind them, the restaurant lights dimmed. But ahead of them, the city sparkled with possibility. With hope. With the promise that when we choose love over pride, when we choose truth over comfort, when we choose to build instead of tear down, anything is possible. And somewhere, in the place where all good souls go, Thomas Sterling smiled. Because the name that had been erased was now written across an entire city in acts of kindness, in changed lives, in second chances and new beginnings. His legacy wasn't buried anymore. It was alive, growing, spreading like light breaking through darkness. That's the power of one moment, friends. One choice. One person brave enough to tell the truth, and another person humble enough to hear it. That's how the world changes. Not in grand gestures, but in moments. Moments when we choose to be better. To do better. To love better. The slap that was meant to silence became the crack that let the light in. And that light is still shining today, in every life touched by the Thomas Sterling Foundation. In every child who gets to go to college. In every worker who gets paid fairly and treated with respect. In every family that finds hope when they thought all hope was gone. So if you're watching this and you're struggling, if you feel invisible, if you think your story doesn't matter, remember Maya. Remember that sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest purpose. Remember that it's never too late to tell the truth, to do what's right, to honor the people who believed in us even when the world forgot them. And if you're someone who's made mistakes, who's let pride and anger control you, who's hurt people you shouldn't have, remember David. Remember that change is possible. That redemption is real. That it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. This isn't just a story, friends. It's a reminder that we're all connected, that every act of kindness ripples out in ways we can't imagine. That love, real love, never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to let it bloom. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that stories like this matter. Because they do. Now go out there and write your own story. Make it one of courage, compassion, and change. Make it one that honors the people who believed in you. Make it one that leaves the world a little bit better than you found it. That's what Maya did. That's what David learned to do. And that's what Thomas Sterling always knew we all could do, if we just remembered what really matters. Not the buildings we build or the money we make, but the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. God bless you all. And remember, it's never too late for the truth to set us free.